there, YouTube? I'm back again today for more Splinterlands content, and today I'm going to be talking about all 32 rule sets in Splinterlands and giving you one tip for every single rule set, because there's tons of different abilities, there's tons of different rule sets, and it can be pretty daunting when you first get into the game. So these are going to be some more basic tips, but you might pick up some things even if you're a more experienced player. And by the way, if you're enjoying the Splinterlands content, please be sure to click on that subscribe button down below, as I post a couple videos every single week. Now the first one we have is Aim True. Attacks won't miss. Abilities like Evade or Fight or Phase won't give any advantage. Similarly, debuff like Blind will be rendered useless. And the big thing with Aim True is this is when I use it as a great opportunity to put in very slow character. The Sandworm comes to my mind. I'm going to be featuring pretty much one card for every one. That might not be the definitive best card to use, but it's a card I've had a great deal of success with in that particular condition. Sandworm's a fantastic backline smasher, 5 damage, but it's got 1 speed, which means it can miss pretty frequently. But with this particular condition, it absolutely destroys the backline. And if you combine it with piercing, so it'll break through armor, that red summoner, absolutely beautiful one to use on Aim True. Moving up to Armored Up, monsters get +2 added to their armor stats. And for this one, the big key is just go past the armor then. Use magic, and honestly, Dwelvin Dragon Scale, one of the best ways to use magic in this instance, and honestly, a card that I'd say is pretty viable even at level 1. You just pick up one of these, and you go to whatever deck you have the most magic in, you slot him in, and you just absolutely shred through their shields. I highly recommend green, blue, or red. I've had some great success with Delvin and red, but just get past the armor by going straight to the magic. Continuing on, we have Back to Basics, where monsters lose their own abilities. Summoner effects, such as those that give abilities to monsters, still take effect. And obviously, when you get this, you pretty much just quit out of the game because you hate everything, because Back to Basics kind of stinks. But honestly, for this one, I would just go with a lot of heavy glass cannons, because the bottom line is no one's got sneak, no one's got snipe, no one's got the ability really to get to your backline very well, and so you can put in some absolutely just game-changing powerful cards, like for instance this one right here, the Djinn Inferni, which typically you'd want to protect it because it's only got 4 health, and it could get whacked. But yeah, glass cannons I think are great on the Back to Basics ones to put the things in the back that are going to do tons of damage and put some big beefy tanks up in the front. Continuing on, we have Broken Arrow. No monsters with range will be available to choose from. And with that being said, I think it's a great time to go pricklies. A lot of times you put some prickles in there because you know they're probably going to be, going to be punching in the face. And Djwin Chwala, if you're newer to the game and you don't know that this is one of the best cards to get earlier on, this is. It's just a fantastic card. I especially like to combo it with the Reflection ability, but just a really powerful and a Curse Wendeku stopper. Curse Wendeku is just dominant in bronze and slightly into silver when you get there, and pretty much Djwin Chwala puts the Curse Wendeku into its place. Even though some new changes to the game I'm really excited about, that pretty much there's going to be characters that won't deal with the thorns, which I'm very excited about, but fantastic card nonetheless. So Broken Arrow, no monsters with range, well, just get yourself some prickles. Continuing on, we have Close Range. Range units can attack from position 1. Ranged monsters are the new melee monsters. They got a little flavor text there. And this is what I'd recommend using a card with headwinds, but unfortunately, there is next to no affordable cards at all at the lower levels that have headwinds, and that's why I'd say if you're looking to quote-unquote invest into this game, and by the way, none of this is investing advice, I'd recommend checking out the Naga Windmaster. It has won me some matches before when you know they're probably going to go with the ranged damage. Like if you're scouting somebody out, you see they're probably trying to get their white quest for the day. This is a great one to have. Also, for you personally, I mean, it's another person that could be in the front line if they need to be. Moving on, we have Earthquake, and I have 2 words for you. Brighten Bloom. Monsters without flight ability will be hit with 2 melee damage after every round's end. Snared monsters will take 2 melee damage from Earthquake per turn 2. And Brighten Bloom, once again, one of those summoners that if you go and you spend the money, and you're probably going to have to spend, it looks like about $8 right here, you're going to win a ton of matches just because everyone on your team now has the flying ability. And you literally can just outlast people. It's just that simple, and especially if you get someone on your team that has tons of health, tons of this, tons of that. Earthquake, I've won so many matches with Bright and Bloom, cannot recommend it enough. Next we have Equalizer. And with the Equalizer, it's really quite simple. Once again, I would recommend glass cannons, things that have low health but high damage. And I just put one up here. This is the Temporal Master, a card which I don't get out too typically. However, when I know that he's going to bump up to 8 health, it's like, oh, well, now he's doing, 3 magic damage every single turn. And you can level him up to, obviously level 4. That's a long way for a lot of people. But still, glass cannons, I think, are the name of the game with Equalizer. But one thing I would recommend is make sure that you know what number they're going to gump to. So you say, all right, I'm going to make sure I put in at least a 6 health mini tank. So everyone on my team will get at least that health. And I always think that's a good idea. And sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised because someone on the other team will just say, I don't care. And they'll give everybody on your team, 11 health or whatever it may be. But glass cannons, I think, are a great one for Equalizers. Next, we have Equal Opportunity. All monsters will attack from any position. Ranged monsters cannot attack from position 1 and will target the enemy monster with the lowest health. And honestly, whenever you have an opportunity and you know you're probably going to be hitting in the squishy inner middle part of someone else's deck, I highly recommend Blast Damage. It's just... Blast Damage is fantastic, and the Exploding Rats in particular are just one of my favorite cards to play with, because they're really pretty powerful, and if you can get them up to level 3, assuming you're rocking level 2 summoners, now you've gotten to that 3 damage threshold. The 3 damage threshold is key for blast damage, because now, instead of doing 1 damage to both people on the side, you're doing 2 damage to both people on the side. And so now you're essentially getting, some absolutely fantastic value out of your Exploding Rats. And even if you don't have them all the way to level 3, you can still utilize the summoner that gives everybody the +1 Razor Blade, at which point then they'll have the 3. But yeah, stick them in there. And they're just a fantastic card to utilize. I would recommend Blast Damage if you got Equal Opportunity, because you're just going to be... if you can get 2 or 3 Blast characters in there and they get off those shots, you're probably going to win 9 times out of 10. Continuing onward, we have Even Stevens. Only even mana cards can be used. Your options to choose cards will be halved. You'll be forced to use cards that you really don't use much, but same goes for your opponent. And so... this one obviously is going to be very dependent on your decks, but one deck that I would highly recommend for Evens is, I call it my 4-6-10. And pretty much it's basically just the 4-6. So there is a 6-cost healer in green, there's a 4-cost healer in green, and then you just put whatever tank in front you want. I personally love Grund. He has the double smash. He's absolutely delightful. But I think it's a great combo, and honestly, Even Stevens, a lot of times I'll just reach for the 2 healer combo that I know I have. So, continuing onward, we have Explosive Weaponry. All monsters get the Blast ability, which is my favorite ability in the game, by the way, which does additional damage to monsters adjacent to the target monster. Additional damage is equivalent to main damage /2 rounded down. And this is where having cards with Taunt is just going to be your bread and butter. Ideally, you would have a card for Taunt in every single color if you can, because now what you can do is you can put this character at the end, and essentially you're isolating it. So before, hopefully, you're essentially isolating it. So you're saying, all right, I know this is where a heavy brunt of the damage is going to be. And then what I would even do next to this isolated character is put someone who maybe has Reflect, or maybe has the one where they punch back, or something like that, or can take a lot of damage. Or maybe they have, 1 extra magic shield, or they have 1 extra, the Harden ability, where their shields are a little bit harder. But either way, just any card that has Taunt, making sure, of course, you're not putting it in the 2, 3, 4... but maybe put it in the front. I wouldn't personally recommend it. I like to put it in the 6 slot, and then just put something that's going to eat up the damage in the 5 spot. But that's what I'd recommend for Explosive Weaponry or Blast Damage. Next, we got the Fog of War. Snipe and Sneak abilities are gone. Well, you know what you do? You go for Opportunity then, because that's the last big one that's going to be able to hit things outside of just the front row. And I do this very, very frequently. When I have Fog of War, I will make sure that I load up on Opportunity cards, because it just makes sense. And this is the Feasting Seaweed, which, it's a starter card right now, but it's a great card, especially if you combine it with the Shark, which I love, that gives everybody the +1 attack damage. But for Fog of War, just don't use Snipe and Sneak and switch on over to Opportunity. Next we have Healed Out. No type of healing is allowed in the battle, so abilities like Tank Heal, Triage Heal are rendered useless. This debuff cannot be removed by using Cleanse, Summoner. And honestly, for this one, no healing, one thing I like to do is then just say, okay, give everybody a whole bunch of health. And one of my favorite cards in the entire game that I don't see nearly enough people use is the Baby Unicorn. All friendly monsters have increased health. So essentially, for the cost of $3, you are giving yourself 6 additional health spread out around your team. And if you level this card up, you can then start getting damage once they get up to level 3. And, at that point, you just... And I like to slot this as the number 2 spot. So I'll have a tank up front, and then I'll have this in the 2 hole. And I love the Baby Unicorn. And so if you can't heal, just give everybody more health a different way. Continuing on, we have Heavy Hitters. All monsters do double damage when attacking an enemy that is stunned. And honestly, 9 times out of 10 at the lower levels, this isn't going to mean anything. And unfortunately, that's just because they don't have very many... cheap, low-level cards with the stun ability, which is unfortunate. I, however, do have one. I have the Pit Ogre, and quite honestly, I would recommend getting yourself a Pit Ogre, because if you can actually utilize the Heavy Hitter's ability, you're probably going to win. Because I've had this happen before, especially, maybe, because the bottom line is the Pit Ogre is not a particularly great tank at a low level unless you really protect it, and it's hard to protect a red tank. There's not healing, there's not shielding in the red that's going to be cheap enough for most players. But I would just try it out. Get yourself a Pit Ogre, especially if it's Opportunity or everybody has Sneak or something like that, because if you can actually utilize this condition, you will most likely win. And it's going to be the same with Trample, which we'll get to a little bit later. But Heavy Hitters, try to get yourself a stun monster. And so I definitely recommend renting a Pit Ogre. Or buying it. So next, we have Holy Protection. All monsters get the Divine Shield ability. The first time the monster takes damage from a monster, it is ignored. It works in Earthquake, but not Noxious Fumes. And this is where I really love having some blast damage going on, just because now you're essentially breaking the Divine Shield of the person in the second spot. Or if you're lucky enough to be shooting them, potentially not, let's say they're asking you the back line, now you're essentially shooting the 6 and the 5 slot. It's just blast damage, I think, is key here. And if you can get more than one blast damage as well, that's great. Because a lot of times what people do when they have the Holy Protection is they will put in their glass cannons just because they know they got that little extra layer. And if you can break that, with the blast damage, highly recommend doing some of that. And I just love blast damage in general. Keep your distance. Monsters with melee attack cannot be used. This is when I think it's a really good opportunity to try and use some Magic Reflect, especially if you can... amplify that. And I mean, that's really my best bet there, because you're going to be severely limited. And when you get this condition, you realize, wow, there's a lot of melee monsters. But the Rusty Android is a relatively inexpensive card that's great at doing it. There's also a much better, I believe it's a 9-cost generic card that is fantastic. It does 1 magic damage and it has Amplify. It's a card that I absolutely adore. But Rusty Android, try and deflect some of that stuff. That would be my best recommendation for the Keep Your Distance. Continuing on, we have Little League. You can only use monsters and summoners with 4 or less mana. Once again, we all kind of hate seeing this, I think. But I highly recommend Antoid Platoon, and I've lost so many dang times to this stupid Antoid Platoon when I forget to put it in there. And the bottom line is, it has the shield ability, reduce damage from melee and range attacks, because just for most people, there's not a huge wealth of cards that we have under the cost of 4 that are going to be doing more than 1 damage. So if they don't go magic, you might get super lucky and just have... This thing can soak up so much damage, especially if they're only doing 1 damage. But with Little League, this one just kind of study your decks, know what you have 4 or less of. But I would recommend Antoid Platoon in particular. Continuing on, we have Lost Legendary. Legendary monsters can't be used. Legendary summoners are still available, though. And the big one is this, is if you can't use the Legendary, then go down a step. And that's really what I do in these... And I mean, other than that, there's no real advice that I can give you. It's just know that you're not going to have to face legendary cards, and then make them face some of your purple cards. And the Prismologist is just one of the best cards in the game that I don't see nearly enough people use, and it just boggles my mind. It starts off with 3 damage and blast damage, which means at the bare minimum, as long as it hits, it's going to be dealing 5 damage to your opponent because of the blast off. And it's a delightful card that I wanted to spotlight. Anywho, we have Lost Magic. Magical monsters cannot be used. Your armor will play a very important role here. Well, when your armor plays a very important role, I would recommend the Scavo Hireling or anything that's going to respawn your armor, really. But the key is you need to make sure you keep the Scavo Hireling safe, and that becomes much easier, though, if you give him some armor. But Lost Magic, I mean, the big thing, yeah, and they just said it right there. Armor. Armor is very important, and I'd recommend the Scavo Hireling there in a lot of instances if you have the money. Next, we have Melee Mayhem. Melee monsters attack from anywhere. We recommend using the strongest melee attackers with ability like Blast, Opportunity, Retaliate, and Inspire, and I could not agree more, but I think they're doing a bit of a disservice here not to put Trample, especially if you can combo Trample with some other special abilities, some other tanks that are going to attack first. And so how you can do this is you could put some faster tanks in front of them, and then they'll hopefully get some hits on, and then Demon Shark can then, or whatever trample character you have, can potentially get the blast. But yeah, really any of these big, powerful ones. I talked about the Pit Boss. This is another great instance. The one that has stun that I talked a little bit earlier. That's fantastic. You slide that into the 3/4 slot. But the best thing I would recommend is with your fun special abilities, the one that you might not typically get to use because they're a little bit of some glass cannon tanks, slide them into that 3/4 spot right there, and you're going to see a lot of good success with the Melee Mayhem one. And honestly, I always get really excited when I see Melee Mayhem. Continuing on, we have Noxious Fumes. All monsters start the game poisoned to take 2 damage each turn unless cleansed, and this one, it's kind of a no-brainer, but if you're newer to the game, it might not be, and I still see a lot of people not do it. Just put yourself a cleanse in there. Most of the time, they're relatively inexpensive, and then go around that. Yeah, just cleanse. If you're newer to the game, you might be like, what the hell is cleanse? I don't quite get cleanse. This is where it really comes up in spade because now your front line is not poisoned. Granted, you'll probably only get to cleanse one thing realistically, unless you're healing, but yeah. Continuing on, well, I guess at higher levels that would be different because obviously then your character is going to be higher ranked. But for most people probably watching this video and being like, what's cleanse? They're not going to last very long. So next we have Odd Ones Out. You can only have odd cards, and once again, this is just a study your kind of deck thing, but I would make one big reminder, same thing I did in Evens, in fact, which is there are 2 3-cost healers in blue, so both of them, and then a big beefy tank that's going to do a bunch of damage. I've had a great deal of success on the Odd One Out. And I believe both the healers are actually relatively inexpensive, both the 3-cost healers, if I recall correctly, because there's also the Crab. Continuing on, we have Reverse Speed. Slow monsters attack first. And this is, yeah, try to put monsters with speeds of 1. And honestly, Grum Fireblade. This, anytime I see Reverse Speed, Grum Fireblade just immediately comes to my brain. It's an absolutely spectacular card with a Bloodlust ability. But just in general here, anything with low speed. And I see a lot of people still, even up in silver, I've gotten into golds, and I've seen people doing this as well, where they're putting fast cards up there. It's like, no, don't put fast cards in there. Put slow cards. Yeah, I think that's kind of a no-brainer. But, duh, and I highly recommend Grum Fireblade. He is one of the best cards in the game right now. Continuing on, we have Rise the Commons. Only common and rare monsters may be used in battle. Make a well-balanced team. So for this one, I would just go in here and I'd say, all right, I would go to just common and rare, and I would really look at what lineups do I have that are impressive at all, and just kind of remember that. And you'll start to get some go-to lineups that you go to with Rise of the Commons. But honestly, Rise of the Commons kind of sucks. It really does. Continuing on, we have Silent Summoners. Summoners do not give any stat buff or debuffs or grant use any abilities. So Silent Summoner is one where I really, when I get a Silent Summoner, that's what I like. Obviously, duh, go with the lower cost Summoner. But I like to then go with characters that are going to essentially act as summoners to a certain degree. And what I mean by that is they'll give everyone a special ability. And just what I wanted to spotlight that I don't see used enough, it's a really cool card. It's the Crystal Werewolf, and it has the silence ability, so it reduces the magic attack of all enemy monsters. So essentially, either hindering all your opponents or helping all of your team is something that I highly recommend when you use the silence summoners condition. Continuing on, we got Spreading Fury. All monsters get the Enrage ability. They have increased melee attack and speed when damaged. And this is such a fun one. And the big piece of recommendation I would have here is make sure you're not putting too many tanks. Your tank doesn't have too much armor. This is one of those instances where I would much rather have, no armor, because if they hit your armor, you don't get enraged. You only get enraged once they hit your health. And so, Molten Ogre, like this card right now, oh my gosh. You get this thing enraged, it's just going to destroy. But literally anything with just tons of health is where I would really recommend, and not so much on the armor when it comes to the Spreading Fury. Continuing on, we got Stampede. The trample ability can trigger multiple times per attack if the trampled monster is killed. And I tell you what, I think like a lot of people sleep on this condition. I do not see nearly enough people building around a trample card when they get this. And that's honestly what I'd recommend doing, because if you've never done it, you just don't get it. But this is a stupidly powerful ability, because I've literally just went boom, 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 one after the other in certain instances if you can get past that first main tank. And I just recommend building around a trample character. The Desert Dragon is also a really a good one to go here, especially if you can keep it up, because it starts with a base 4 health, and if you get it up to level 2, get out of here with the piercing. That's disgusting. But yeah, just build around a trample character. I highly recommend this. It's also really fun when it starts to trigger and you get 2 or 3 turns in a row. That can completely shift the game. Continuing on, we have Standard. No modification to the standard gameplay rules and mechanics. So obviously I'm not giving you a hint there. Just use whatever deck you want then. But then we go Super Sneak. All monsters have the Sneak ability. Targets the last monster on the enemy team instead of the first monster. And that is always where I recommend then, alright, if you know what's going to happen, then get yourself some Thorns in the back line. And this is one of those instances where I would almost say tank in the front, tank in the back. Not a bad combination to have right now, especially as long as you put the prickles in the back. Continuing onward, we have Taking Sides. Neutral monsters may not be used in battles. And this is, I would just really recommend making sure you have a good deal of versatility in your cards. I know a lot of people just want to say, I want to level this up. I want to get things leveled up. I would much rather have a wide variety of cards before I would focus on necessarily leveling up my cards. Unless there's some cards that I take that I would say there are exceptions to that, and I actually made a list about some of the best cards that I'd recommend leveling up first when you start getting, higher level summoners. But just giving yourself some variability. And for instance, the Armor Smith is just an absolutely fantastic card. If you don't know about the Armor Smith, it's 2 cost, it's a white card, and it repairs your armor. It's delightful, especially in this Taking Sides, where you might potentially not have, the common one, the 3-cost common one that repairs armor. So this is just one card I'm spotlighting here, but that would be my best recommendation, is just making sure you have a lot of versatility in your decks. Mini tanks. If you go through your deck and you don't have some sort of tank at pretty much every cost, 2 or above, I think you need to look into that, because it's always important to have, in particular, mini tanks. But that's continuing on. Save that for the next video. Next we have Target Practice. All ranged and magic attack monsters have the Snipe ability, which the Snipe ability, one of the most difficult abilities to really wrap your brain around. It pretty much means that it's not going to go for the first spot. It's going to go for the 2, 3, 4, 5 spot, and it's going to go for the monster that is either doesn't have an attack, or it's pretty much it's going to hit the 2 through 5 spot most of the time. And when you're going to hit the 2 through 5 spot most of the time, once again, I highly recommend Blast Damage. Goblin Tower, there's a reason you see a lot of people use this card, because it's just a great card, but especially when you're going to be sniping, and you know that you're probably going to be hitting the person on the left and the person on the right in addition to the person that you're trying to hit. Just fantastic card. You get it up to level 3, then it can start really, in this particular instance, in the sniper instance, doing 7 damage. Think about that. 7 damage. Because you got the 3 on that, and then the 2 to the side. Just beautiful. Continuing on, we have unprotected. Monsters do not have any armor, do not get armor from abilities or summoner buffs. Once again, if there's no armor, I'd highly recommend making sure they have more health. I talked about the Unicorn earlier, one of my personal favorite cards in the entire game. One of my personal favorite cards to combo with it is the Djinn Renova, which has strengthened. All friendly monsters have increased health because they do stack on top of each other, which now means instead of having, say 2 health, your glass cannon now has 4 health. And then you can even get the summoner that gives everybody a heart as well, and now it's got 5 health, and you're like, wow, you're really stinking hard to kill. But yeah, highly recommend experimenting with the strengthened deck, just in general, but in particular in the unprotected setting. Next, we got up close and personal. Only monsters with melee attack may be used in battle, and there's that disintegrator that everybody hates because, God, you just see it all the time, and the reason you see it all the time because it's super powerful, especially in a condition like this where you know that it's just going to be, you're going to be getting punched in the face all the time. So I would, and this is one of the rare instances where I would say it's totally worth it just to have him do absolutely nothing but his special ability. And there's some times where characters are like that. We're like, yeah, I know you're not going to attack. I know you're not going to contribute to my team in any way, shape, or form, damage-wise, until you get to the front. But for what you're doing elsewhere, highly recommend Demoralize when you're going up close and personal. And the last condition we have is Weak Magic. Magic attacks hit armor before reducing health. And with this one, I honestly just love having piercing and things with big chunks of armor. And so Goblin Mech fits both those bills. At level 1, you're still looking at 5 armor, 6 health, 4 damage, a decent 3 speed, and piercing. It's a fantastic little tank, assuming you can keep it protected. And luckily, with the Weak Magic attribute, you can not only heal this, but you can also shield it as well. And so, Weak Magic, I'd recommend getting yourself some piercing. But, there you go. That is one tip for all the 32 conditions in Splinterlands. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to click on that subscribe button down below as I post Splinterlands videos all the time. Also, in the comments below, let me know what some other type videos pertaining to Splinterlands would you like to see. And thanks for your time, YouTube. Bye-bye.